Hello, glad to have everyone here today. Let me share my screen. And this is going to be the wrong screen, so I'm going to try to swap them. There we go. Hope everyone's doing well today. What we're going to try to go through today are some examples of language that helps make people give bequests. That'll be the main portion of our presentation today. If we have time, we have another couple more short case studies, one on using simplified language in our appeals, and then the other one about using empathy in copy. As ever, I will try to, I will be looking at the chat to see if there are any questions. Feel free to shout them out to the panelists. And then also there is the ability to raise hands. So if you raise your hand, hopefully I will be able to see it here on my screen. And I will be able to kick it over to you, allow you to talk and ask any questions. So if you would love to hear your voice, raise your hand. If you would like to be anonymous and send in your questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And with that, we will continue. So this comes from a large-scale study of bequest donors. They asked across 40 different charities with over 4,000 people. And they asked them two questions, or two kind of setup questions. The first one is, would you give money to this organization? And then the second one is, would you consider a bequest donation to this organization? And the average gap between those is about 10%. So how do we get people who are willing to give to an organization to consider leaving a bequest gift? So how do we close that gap? So two things that were tested right off the bat. First is trying to do a social norming campaign, letting folks know that Americans generally do leave 5 to 10% to charity in their wills. Survey results agree that people think that this is something that you should do. And then another one is, I would call it more of a negative framing, saying, you know, heirs typically blow through their inheritances, so that may not be a good strategy, give the money to charity. And both of them worked. Spendthrift heirs did not work as well, and it was actually counterproductive among men, although I don't know that that was statistically significant. Social norming was a bit more effective, so it got the gap down to under 9%, and then using them both together got the gap from 10% down to 8%. So both do work, but there were some things that were more effective, and those were bequest stories. Specifically, living bequest stories were more effective. Living deceased bequest stories for all 40 of the organizations tested, and the more the better. They actually tested 7 living bequest stories against 4 living bequest stories, and that closed the gap the most. 4 living stories beat a mix of living and deceased bequest stories. So if you can put stories in there of people who are living and have put you in their will and what the impact that they hope to have with that, that is the most impactful thing that you can do alongside of your usual bequest pitch to get people to consider giving a bequest donation. And I probably shouldn't even be referring to it as a bequest donation for reasons that will become obvious. That's what's known as a tease in the business. Asking people if they want to honor another person also helps close that gap. That's something that can go along with all of the other bequest messages that we talked about. And it's particularly effective among those who have a friend or a family member with a connection to the organization. So if you have a spouse who is suffering from the disease that the organization is working with or working on, that's something that's particularly effective to ask them if they want to honor that person with their gift. That's actually more attractive for people to honor, for ascendants to do that, older people to do that, less popular for descendants to honor those who are older. And that may just be the nature of bequest giving, or that could be a real difference. So then they looked at what language we use. So the only language that changes here is make a gift versus make a transfer of assets. And the whole rest of it is you get immediate tax deduction, still control the investment, receive income, blah, 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 blah. So make a gift versus make a transfer of assets. Who will be interested in giving now? Who will be interested in giving in the future? And who said, don't ever contact me about this? So when you ask if someone wants to make a transfer of assets, 14% are interested now. When you asked if someone wants to make a gift, 27% are interested now. And the reverse is true for will never be interested. More people say, I'm never going to be interested in making a transfer of assets, and I will never be interested in making a gift. So simple language works effectively here. Then similarly, for charitable gift annuities, do you want to make a gift, or do you want to enter into a contract with a charity where you transfer your cash or property? Not surprisingly, 13% of people are okay making a contract, 29% of people are interested in making a gift. So you can literally double your results with more simplified language around making a gift. So the simplest version, do you want to make a gift to a charity in your will, or do you want to make a bequest gift, that bequest language? And you have 23% of people who are interested in making a gift to charity in their will, 12% who are interested in making a bequest gift to charity. Simple language works best. So instead of the language that I started it off with, what language makes people give bequests, we should be asking what language makes people give in their wills. So that is the bequest section, and I just ripped through that. So I'm hoping you have some questions, either by raising your hand or by putting something into the chat. I'm not yet seeing anyone. So feel free to keep typing, raise your hand if you have a question, but otherwise we'll go on to a short study, A/B test really, about using simple language outside of the bequest realm. Feel free to go back for questions on any of that bequest topic stuff. Oh, I see something in the Q&A. I am in late. Did you talk about where to add this language? No, I did not. This is something that works across media, apparently, in the survey. So this is something that can be put into a mail piece. It's something that can be put into an email about bequests, inserts, brochures. It's something that should work across different media and different channels. Thank you for that question. I did forget about the where on how to add this language. As we all know, the where is vitally important in a lot of these different things, so appreciate the question there. Okay, let's go on to a short study on simple language. This is the Leadership Institute, and they're talking about how they frame who their opponents are. This is a conservative organization, so their control verbiage is leftists are the opponents. They think it's specific, more powerful, and conveys more emotion. And in terms of specificity, they know that what we would commonly refer to as a liberal, if you look at a classic liberal, that's actually someone who would be a conservative. Just like left and right, those definitions have changed over time. And so they said leftist is the way we want to refer to this audience. But liberal is a term that is better known. You hear candidates talking about liberal this, liberal that, whereas you don't hear a lot of leftist in the discourse. And I actually went and verified this on Google Trends. You see a lot more use of liberal than leftist. So they had 3 email campaign. The only thing that they swapped out was leftist was in the control and liberal was in the test audience. And looking at conversion rates, leftist had a conversion rate of 0.06%, liberal had a conversion rate of 0.13%. So a 119% increase in conversion from just changing that word, using a simpler word to refer to their opponent. large enough sample size to get a good confidence interval that would be statistically significant. So I try to put in links to all of these down here. So this one was from Next After, who tends to work with more conservative causes, as you might guess. Any questions about this or about bequests? Feel free to keep those questions coming in the chat, in the Q&A, raise your hand as a participant. And if for some reason you don't get your question in here today, feel free to email any questions thereafter. So we are making good time today. So we'll go through to empathy. So this came out of a 2017 study, and they added empathy language to the beginning of a mail piece about refugees. And they said, imagine you're a refugee fleeing persecution in a war-torn country. What would you take with you, limited to only what you can carry yourself on your journey? Where would you flee to, or would you stay in your home country? What do you feel would be the biggest challenge of you? So you're really trying to get that person to think about who they are, what they would do in this case of emergency, put themselves in the place of someone fleeing persecution, which isn't something that we often think about. Now, that said, there are some people, Frank Luntz, for example, talks about imagine being the most powerful word in the English language. It impacts our mirror neurons. It makes us put ourselves in the place of someone else, and that type of imagining can really change worldviews. So when people got this language at the beginning of their appeal, and this wasn't a traditional donation appeal, they said they were less likely in follow-up surveys to discriminate against Muslims versus Christians in immigration. So they asked someone that said, how likely are you to want Christians to come into the country? How likely are you to want Muslims to come into the country? And that gap closed significantly among Republicans, among Democrats, among independents. Didn't matter if you got empathy language and you were forced to think about what it would be like to be a refugee fleeing persecution, you were less likely to discriminate in immigration. So interesting, but can it increase donations? You may suspect an answer to the question by the fact that I'm actually talking about this as a test result, but let's actually go to the test. So an international relief charity had their control language, this is in an email, so control was their appeal. Test was, the email started with, and this was the only change, adding, imagine you're a Syrian refugee fleeing your war-torn country, where would you flee, what would you stay? That's similar sort of language, except because the appeal was about Syria, we made it specific to the Syrian refugee leaving. So the test 2 was the same copy, and there was a change to the subject line. So you make this change, and the subject line was, what if it were you? So can we introduce empathy? And the subject line also increase open rate and increase conversion rate. So good news, the tests had higher gift rates and higher revenues, significantly higher. So test 1 had 68% higher gift rates. The subject line test had 58% and higher revenue. So slight increases, not significant in test 1, and about a 20%, actually I think it was a high teen increase in average gift with the subject line test. So higher gift rates, higher revenue in both of those. We're going to say that the subject line didn't seem to matter in this case. We didn't see a change in open rate, which would be the intermediate variable there. And that change didn't, the lack of change there didn't cause any change in how people reacted to the email with a different subject line or their tendency to give. So significant increase in what you would see as results using empathy here. So one attendee asked if we think empathy would work equally well for non-humanitarian causes, e.g. wildlife. I would say absolutely, but we've seen previous studies that indicate that some form of anthropomorphization, making someone seem human, let's just go with that. Making something that isn't human seem human can increase results in and of itself. We see this in how people react to mascots and cartoons, that sort of humanization of animals makes them seem more real to us, which I would say that if you said, imagine yourself as a deer in this case, and you had been living in this habitat, but suddenly it changed. You couldn't drink the water, you couldn't eat the grass. Where would you go? What would your instincts say to do for you? That sort of language, putting yourself in the place of anyone. In this case, I would say animals would also work. I don't know that it would work for probably cultural organizations. I don't know that a museum would be able to talk about a piece of art in that way. But for a museum, it could be about the artist. Imagine yourself wanting to display your life's work, that sort of thing. So empathy can be used in various ways. I do think it would work with animal causes and wildlife as well. For environmental causes, you probably want to be talking about the human or animal impacts of this to be able to trigger empathy. Any other questions? Anyone else want to ask a question? Write a question in the Q&A, write one in the chat, because this was my last slide. Well, while we're waiting for those to come in, let me give you a bit of good news. You will have a break from me next month. We have a volunteer from No Kid Hungry to present some test results. I may also have some test results as well in case that doesn't go to the full half hour, but I know they have a number of good case studies that they'd like to share with the group. We are always looking for good test results, whether from the for-profit or non-profit folks. We've had a couple of folks raise their hands and we're in discussions on some of those, but would love to have you present in September or beyond. Will be headlined by No Kid Hungry, so probably in that beyond category. And if you have studies that are coming up, I'm running this test right now, and I think it could lend itself to the results. Let us know, and we can book time farther ahead. You know, this is going in our October appeal. We should have results by February, whatever that is. Happy to book February for you. Did have a question about whether we will send out the slides shared earlier. Yes, we will have these slides available. We will also be taking this video, and I believe we will be putting it on the TNPA YouTube channel. That'll be a good way of getting those. We'll also recordings of this on the Zoom channel that you use to get. Any other questions? Gotta love that dead air. Radio Pro right here. Okay, hearing none. Again, calls to action. We'd love to hear your tests. What would you like to see? We'd like to hear from you what you'd like to see in the future. I'd like to see if anyone has a good test on digital ask strings or mail reply device language or mid-major donor, whatever that is. Let us know what you'd like to be hearing from these tests, and we will seek it out and curate it for you. And hope you'll join us next month when we'll have No Kid Hungry and perhaps some other tests available. Thank you very much for your time today, and have a good day.